Hi, welcome to PsychEd. In this video, we're going to be talking about the behaviourist approach in psychology, and more specifically, how it assumes that behaviour is learned through conditioning. We'll be breaking down two key types of conditioning: classical conditioning and operant conditioning. First up, let's talk about classical conditioning. This is a type of learning where an organism associates two stimuli to produce a new learned response. Essentially, classical conditioning is all about learning through association. The most famous example of classical conditioning comes from the Russian physiologist Ivan Pavlov and his work with dogs. Pavlov originally noticed that dogs would start salivating whenever they saw food. This response was automatic and unlearned, known as a reflex. But Pavlov wanted to see if he could condition this response by associating it with something else. He conducted an experiment where, every time he gave the dogs food, he would ring a bell. At first, the dogs didn't respond to the bell at all, but after repeatedly hearing the bell right before they were given food, the dogs began to associate the bell with the arrival of food. Eventually, just the sound of the bell, even without food, was enough to make the dogs salivate. This is what we call classical conditioning. To break it down, before conditioning, we have an unconditioned stimulus, the food, which produces an unconditioned response, salivation. During conditioning, we pair a neutral stimulus, the bell, with the unconditioned stimulus, food. After conditioning, the neutral stimulus, bell, becomes a conditioned stimulus that triggers a conditioned response, salivation. So, how does this work with humans? A common example of classical conditioning in people is when someone develops a fear of something through association. For instance, if a person experiences a car accident while driving in the rain, they might begin to feel anxious every time it rains, even when they aren't driving. Here, rain, which was once neutral, has become associated with fear, the conditioned response. Now let's move on to the second type of conditioning, operant conditioning. Operant conditioning is about learning from the consequences of our actions. It was popularized by the psychologist B.F. Skinner. In this type of learning, behavior is strengthened if it is followed by reinforcement, and weakened if it is followed by punishment. In other words, we learn to behave in certain ways because of the rewards or punishments that follow our actions. Let's break down a few key terms. Positive reinforcement is when a behavior is followed by a reward, making it more likely for that behavior to be repeated. Negative reinforcement is when something unpleasant is removed as a result of a behavior, which also makes that behavior more likely to occur again. Punishment, on the other hand, decreases the likelihood of a behavior by introducing an unpleasant consequence or removing something desirable. Let's look at some examples of these concepts in action. Positive reinforcement. Imagine a student works hard on an assignment and gets praise from their teacher. The praise acts as positive reinforcement, so the student is more likely to work hard on future assignments to receive more praise. Negative reinforcement. Picture someone who takes painkillers to relieve a headache. The removal of the headache encourages the person to take painkillers again in the future when they feel pain. This is negative reinforcement because the unpleasant stimulus, the headache, was removed. Punishment. Say a teenager stays out past their curfew and their parents ground them for a week. The grounding is a form of punishment that aims to reduce the likelihood that they will stay out late again. So, to sum up, the behaviourist approach explains that behaviour is learned through conditioning. Classical conditioning involves learning by association, as shown by Pavlov's dogs, while operant conditioning is about learning through consequences, whether through reinforcement or punishment. Understanding these concepts helps us see how both animals and humans learn behaviours in everyday life, from fears to habits and everything in between. Thanks for watching, and if you found this helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more psychology content. See you in the next video.